Greetings from 1399 North Orchard Road in Vineland, New Jersey. I'm Darius Dinshaw, and I am here physically, obviously, and you are here mentally. I would really prefer to have this kind of a conversation face-to-face. Questions and answers are much easier than this type of a monologue. However, I thought of this format making a video some years ago, but it just didn't come to pass, and on April 26th of this year, 1993, I decided it just had to be done. So here we are. Some people do not read quite so well as others. They do not understand spoken word as well, perhaps as somebody explaining something to them. So this is what I will attempt to do in this somewhat long videotape. Now, it is quite reasonable for someone to ask, who are you? Who am I? Why should we listen to you? What are your qualifications? So I will list them as I believe is pertinent to this tape. I was born in October 1927 at home and educated at home, mostly by my mother. In later years, some of the Institute's secretaries substituted as a teacher. They used the standard textbooks that my mother obtained, so in some respects I had what would be called a normal education. Of course, what was quite abnormal, you might say, or extraordinary, was the information that we absorbed from dining room chatter with our parents, and especially in respect to Spectro-Chrome. I was working at an early age assembling the slide carriers and such for the institutes, and later on I continued in a greater capacity actually manufacturing the entire projector. That of course would not qualify me to teach you, but the other material which I've learned through the years, primarily of course from the several classes, the resident classes that my father taught. Now here and there I will refer to him as Dinshaw, as he preferred to be known, and of course I will also call him Father, or my father, whatever seems to come best at that particular juncture. So he taught 40-hour classes, 2 weeks, after each person would study his 1933 encyclopedia. He would read those volumes at home, study them for 600 hours. By then, obviously, you were quite thoroughly conversant with all the terms and what he was trying to teach you, which was considerably different from orthodox medical teachings. I eventually acquired a diploma, and it is the last diploma that was issued by his corporation, the Visible Spectrum Research Institute. I would expect many would feel that this was really not worth the paper it was printed on. He and I, of course, have considerably different views on the subject. Further, besides acquiring this SCN, as you may have noticed on the title of this My Spectro-Chrome video, I also aided my father in 2 very lengthy trials. The first one in 1945 in Brooklyn, New York, the second one in Camden, New Jersey. Each of them spanned approximately 6 weeks, and in each of those I learned a good deal of Spectro-Chrome from the opposition's view, from their experts, and also of course from those who stood by the side of my father and testified for him. Of course, unfortunately, we lost both of those lawsuits, and I do not really blame the jurors, not one bit. Both of these were fought under FDA regulations, that is Food and Drug Administration, and their regulations state that any medical device, in spite of the fact that they believe that this work has no value whatsoever, it is still termed a medical device because we say it is such. Under those regulations, if a single statement, it does not have to be false, it only has to be misleading to the person who would be reading that particular piece of literature. Now, the encyclopedia is rather complex in some places and rather simple in others. So a jury was expected to decide that the entire system was either guilty or not guilty. And in these two cases, they felt there at least was one single statement that was misleading. Now, virtually from day one, 1920, April 26, when Father delivered the first lecture on spectrochrome in New York City, virtually all of the projectors bore a brass or other label. And virtually the first sentence on that label was that spectrochrome is the system of measurement and restoration of the human radioactive and radioemanative equilibrium. Now, what my father had in mind by that statement, the radioactivity nowadays means radiation, radium, uranium, atom bombs, and such. But in 1920, his terminology was taken and was supposed to be taken to mean that there are activities within the human body. Radioactive meaning that there are activities and they radiate. Radioemanative reinforces that these activities can be worked upon by spectrochrome. The measurement device, of course, was the dosimeter, and the restoration, of course, is spectrochrome therapy. So I don't blame those jurors. I just wish there were a better way than trying to prove the value of this in a law court, where a single statement says you are guilty. In the second trial, Judge Foreman said it was evil, and that by the verdict of the jury, he had to stamp this work out. Well, he didn't quite succeed. So back to my qualifications. When Father died in 1966, I became president of the Visible Spectrum Research Institute, and since we were then laboring under an injunction which followed after those two trials, the activity of that institute was virtually entirely limited to the state of New Jersey. Nothing could be sent across state lines pertaining to spectrochrome. So I would travel around every fall from 1966 through 1975, and we still had meeting places where our members would gather once a month, discuss their physical problems, what they decided spectrochrome could or could not do for them, and the person in charge, who was a knowledgeable person, usually a graduate, would instruct them what to do. These meetings were held, as I said, once a month until 1975. At that point, Roshan, my older brother, and Jal, my younger brother, we three who are trustees of that organization, decided that it just was not worth continuing to sell just the projectors in New Jersey, and even a cookbook, the Dinshaw cookbook, since it pertained to my father's ideas, was banned from interstate commerce. So we then dissolved the Visible Spectrum Research Institute and formed this, Dinshaw Health Society, of which I am also president. While I was traveling those virtually 10 years, I spoke with and to hundreds of people who were obviously satisfied with what had been done in their lives with spectrochrome. If it were not so, why would they bother attending the meetings and staying as members? And I gleaned from their past experiences a good deal that cannot be had from writings. You must get the information from people who are using it. And there it pays to have a good ear, which I do. I don't always talk. I'm very often, I'm willing to listen. As far as listening to me right now, I must state in all fairness, I have no formal medical training. You listen to me at your risk. If you decide that you think what I say is worthy of paying attention to, then do so. Try spectrochrome. If you think it doesn't make sense whatever, send the tape back even. We'll refund your money for it. I'm exercising my constitutional right to speak my mind. I'm not telling you to commit a treasonous act. I'm not telling you to riot. I'm not inciting such things. I'm not yelling fire in a crowded theater. I'm just giving you my views on Spectro-Chrome. This, of course, was basically designed by Dinshaw. He founded it upon the works of others, Babbitt, Fraunhofer, Bunsen, Kirchhoff. There are many names that come to mind. And he enlarged upon it and glued it all together into a solid package which makes sense, to me at least, and it has stood the test of time from 1920. There are very few changes. There can be no changes in the fundamentals, of course, because human anatomy will not change. Some knowledge may be acquired in the details of physics and things like that. The details of anatomy, DNA, RNA, those things were not known in my father's day. So the basics of Spectro-Chrome, that is Dinshaw's Spectro-Chrome. As I present it to you now, here, in this day, this is my Spectro-Chrome. I am responsible for its propagation and its teachings. It is your responsibility to give it an open-minded and honest test to see what it can or cannot do in your particular case. You do so, of course, on your own responsibility. This is your constitutional right. At this point in time, there are a couple of buzzwords which come to mind. One of them is New Age therapy. Well, this type of therapy used even gemstones, colored gems, back into antiquity. But even so, compared to the modern technology of drugs, this is New Age in the sense that it is non-invasive. It relies entirely on your physical constitution to generate its effects. So I don't mind it being called New Age. And the other term which I've heard used is vibrational therapy. This is certainly a vibrational therapy. Light is a vibration, at least by most people's definition. The Dinshaw definition varied from this somewhat. To my father, something that vibrated was like a clock pendulum. It goes back, it goes forth, but it doesn't escape. It doesn't leave its place. Whereas energies such as light or sound, they do have a vibrational number, a frequency, but the force is actually leaving the point of generation and is being received at a distant point. So this is perhaps semantics, so I'll continue to follow what they call vibrations. It's rather easier for most people to understand. I'm well aware that this system, on the face of it, really does strain credulity. These are 5 pieces of my father's type of glass. A red, a yellow, a green, a blue, and a violet. These and a light source, something to give you the photons, the energy, is Spectro-Chrome. On the face of it, when I say it that way, I agree. It really just doesn't make that much sense to say 5 glasses and a bulb can generate any effect, let alone the startling effects, the amazing results that some people have reported. How well you may do in your particular instance, there is no way I can foretell, because Spectro-Chrome does not act like drugs act. You take a strong drug like digitalis and your heartbeat will increase. In one of these 6-week cases, I remember a doctor who said he had tested Spectro-Chrome, and in his particular instance he tried scarlet, which, as you'll see in the attributes of each color, is the color we use to raise heartbeat or blood pressure and such. But there is a difference, an amazing difference, since we are relying on your own individual health characteristics, your constitution. If you don't need a particular color, it will have little to no effect upon you. And in that particular case, the worthy doctor received on his patient no effect. With his medical training, to him, it made Spectro-Chrome to be a worthless system because you couldn't rely on it. To us, to me, my Spectro-Chrome, the way I think of it, this is the life-saving ability of Spectro-Chrome. That patient did not need higher blood pressure or more circulation. So Scarlet did not react upon that person. On another person, I would fully expect it if they needed it. So whereas I see it as 100% gain, the medical doctor saw it as 100% loss. There are, of course, limitations to any system, and Spectro-Chrome is no exception. It does not do everything for everybody. It can do some things that other systems may not be able to accomplish, but for instance, in a heart attack, you may well save your life getting to a hospital emergency room. Oxygen may be necessary, things like that, where Spectro-Chrome would not have ample time for the body to react. Further, you have your parents to consider. What did they give you as a heritage, your genetic makeup? Some people are programmed genetically. Wine, women, and song, they still live to 105. And apparently all too many people say, well, if they could do it, I can do the same, and it won't bother me, and continue on their merry lives. But for the average person, the wine, women, and song just doesn't work. You will pay the piper. As you sow, so will you reap. So your lifestyle has much to do with whether Spectro-Chrome is really efficient and efficacious in your case. Even if it were to be that your lifespan is going to be quite short, there is a dreadful condition, genetic apparently, called progeria, and virtually nobody lives past perhaps 20. It is more common to die as a teenager. They get heart attacks at the age of 8. Their hair turns white, their teeth fall out. It is something wrong that apparently the time clock within those unfortunate persons has gone on to triple speed or quadruple speed, and all their cellular activities just go absolutely haywire. Genetics, obviously, this is an up-and-coming therapy. Whether you believe it is moral or not is, of course, another story. Spectro-Chrome cannot change your genetic makeup, but the results, the end effect of what your genetic makeup causes your body to do, that's not good to miss the word Spectro-Chrome. Spectro-Chrome can alter what effects that particular genetic makeup of yours causes you to suffer. So no matter what case comes to hand, and this was Dr. Baldwin's view also, whom you will read and hear much about in succeeding chapters in this book. Dr. Baldwin said, I do not feel justified in turning away any case without giving Spectro-Chrome a fair chance at it. I feel the same way. I think virtually every case, even though you may be virtually on your last legs and there is no hope for any system, the transition can be made much more peaceful, and you will not have to be drugged and doped so that you really don't understand what is occurring in the last moments of your life. With that said, this is the introduction to what I expect to show you. Now, this is a videotape. I can't very well give you an index to it, but virtually all VCRs, your player, they have counters on them, numbered. So as the tape goes by, you could, at the beginning of each chapter, mark what your particular VCR, the number. So this video will span several hours. You would not want to have to hunt through it to find a particular section in this video. So if you mark your counter number, and I will give you a break at the beginning of each chapter so you can do so. If you mark the number according to your VCR, then you can always go back to it and find just what you need for a particular part on this exposition on Spectro-Chrome. So I'll give you a moment here to break and put your VCR number on. We'll come to the first section in our book, Let There Be Light. If you have a copy of it, it may have a yellow cover or it may have a multicolored cover. In either case, the content is the same. So have no fear, you'll be able to follow along exactly as I lead you. All right, we'll begin just after page 4. Most volumes in the last 3 years have had an additional 4 sheets inserted just after page 4, marked additions. Spectro-Chrome fundamentals do not change, but the practice, how we can help you, does change. And in order to keep this book 100% up to date, at least 99% up to date as best I can, we periodically update these 4 pages, these editions. The main problem we have is with obtaining filters. The original glass, of course, those were matched by the Dinshaw family, my father, mother, and a stepsister. And of course, after my father died, my mother taught me, and I will teach you in this video how they were matched. But since we cannot work both sides of the fence here, under Food and Drug Administration regulations, if we sell you any part of a Spectro-Chrome device, filters, bulbs, anything, we then come under the Food and Drug Administration regulations. We would have to register. We would have to again prove or try to prove that everything exactly follows FDA ideas. This is virtually impossible. We've been through these cases, one successfully, of which we will speak further along, and the last 2 unsuccessfully. So we can't play both sides, so we must stay with the ability to give out information. Since 1975, we have done so, and we have had no problems with the government forces that be. Oddly, though the Food and Drug says this type of therapy is almost entirely worthless, the Internal Revenue Service granted us tax exemption on the idea that this is a scientific educational corporation, which I say it is, and they agreed. But it still seems kind of odd that it can be scientific and educational on a totally worthless subject. Well, it's not the subject that's worthless, it's the way people practice it according to the government. That color therapy has value in some very limited ways, which we'll come to, but Spectro-Chrome the ideas of Spectro-Chrome are worthless. Now, I was born Darius Dinshaw Gadiali, but my father was known virtually everywhere as Dinshaw, as Colonel Dinshaw, of which he was quite proud, the fact that he had attained the rank of colonel in the New York Police Air Reserve. So to be called Colonel Dinshaw was quite confusing. It sounded as though that were his last name, which didn't bother him. He just preferred not to use Gadiali. It was just a little bit too stiff for many people's tongue. So legally I had the Gadiali dropped, and I am indeed Darius Dinshaw. However, if I say Dinshaw, that means the Dinshaw, the one who designed and perfected Spectro-Chrome. Now, I can't very well read this entire book. I can pick out the more pertinent, the parts that I have found through the years are more open to misunderstanding or just complete lack of understanding. They're just not taken the way they should be. Those we will focus on especially. I wrote a book previous to this called The Spectro-Chrome System, and that was updated in 1985, and all the information contained therein, the Spectro-Chrome System, was included in Let There Be Light and expanded considerably. Because as I say, you get older, and if you're careful, you do get smarter, and you try to make use of the knowledge acquired thereby. in two places in Let There Be Light where I decided that it was just not appropriate to try to cram in all the information that I would have liked to, I stated that possibly at another time there would be another book. Maybe there will, maybe there won't. But I can see that this video may well take the place of what I would write in those other books. So take it as such. This will take the place, quite probably, of another book. In this video, we will use several names on whom my father based the work. Edwin D. Babbitt, who was born in 1828, Sir William Crookes in 1832, Joseph von Fraunhofer in 1787, Sir Isaac Newton, whose name is fairly well known in other fields of physics and optics and things, in 1642. And just how these are tied together, you will see shortly. The preface. Dr. Kate W. Baldwin, undoubtedly the strongest vocal and practicing supporter of the Dinshaw Society, you might say, because the people he got to know through the years were his friends. They realized what could be done with Spectro-Chrome. He didn't call it a society then, we call it a society now. So Dr. Baldwin was the strongest of that group. She had 17 projectors in use in the Philadelphia Women's Hospital. We'll go into much greater detail how she felt, how she testified in a court case and such, much further along. But she did speak on Spectro-Chrome, and the one paper that we have available is an extract, an abstract of a talk she gave at a Philadelphia meeting. This was in October of 1926, and in April of 1927 the Atlantic Medical Journal printed that abstract. Now, one of our present society members sent me a copy of the original abstract as it was published from I guess it was a library out in the Midwest. So I can see that there was no mistake. It was printed repeatedly in my father's literature, and we reprint it again in this book, Let There Be Light, because it carries the view of a professional, somebody to whom a person would have confidence that they knew what they were doing, they knew what they were talking about. My father, of course, had a medical profession in India, which we'll come to in the next chapter. But this was a person here in this country with its regulations. So it makes a difference when you can speak with somebody who speaks with authority, and Dr. Baldwin certainly did. So we'll break here, and you can mark your VCR number for Chapter 1. Dinshaw was a common name in India. It still is, I guess. It means king of duty. He certainly lived up to it for 92 years, his entire life. That he was a man ahead of his time, there can be no doubt. He would be, by today's standards, by any standards, easily termed a genius. Chapter 1 is a rather short, I would say, considering what he achieved in a lifetime. He wore many hats, he did many things, he had many occupations through the years. I could find nowhere any information that he took any courses in medicine. He was an early bloomer as far as general scholastics were concerned, starting kindergarten at 2.5 and so on, so that at a very early age, 14 or 15, he was teaching as an assistant demonstrator in chemistry and physics in several institutions in Bombay, India. That he was smart, there is no doubt. That he knew what he was talking about, of course, that is open to question in the medical field. not in my mind, but in organized medicine's mind. His medical practice at that time was quite extensive. He had 2 clinics, and he was, as he expected in later years other practitioners to be, he was eclectic. That is, he used whatever devices, therapies, methods were available to him. In time, a case came before one of his colleagues dying of colitis, a lady named Zerbanu. And to my father's mind, there was nothing more could be done. His colleague was using all the then known remedies to stop the purging, perhaps 100 times in a day, with little to no effect. So my father came to a decision, with the concurrence of his colleague, that it was time to try another therapy, in this case Dr. Edwin D. Babbitt's chromotherapy, light therapy. So by scanning Dr. Babbitt's reports and methods of operation, my father came to the conclusion that this case required an astringent, and it would also be a bactericide, and that color was indigo. So we acquired what he euphemistically called pickle bottles of an appropriate tint, and shone the light of a lantern through one of them, and the fluids she drank were put into another one and exposed to sunlight. So between these 2 methods, direct exposure through one pickle bottle and the other irradiating, so to speak, the fluids which she drank, in a few days, very few days, she was out of bed and virtually, in today's terminology, cured. That was in 1897, but it took another 23 years of research, some procrastination, as we all do. It just doesn't seem at a given moment that's what should be done. But in time, in 1920, it fructified. The end of his researches resulted in the first lecture on spectrochrome therapy in New York City. From then until 1924, he taught approximately 800 professionals and laypersons. The professionals were of every possible degree: chiropractors, traditional MDs, nurses, dentists. Everyone that would listen fell under the spell of spectrochrome, that it could do something that other systems were not, at least then, able to do. I believe that even to this day, spectrochrome can do things. Even with the modern medical advances, spectrochrome can do some things that they cannot do. At any rate, in 1924, with everything going at a rip-roaring pace, the American Medical Association, in their AMA journal, I have a copy here of the 1924 January issue, January 26. Without any investigation, one of their AMA members wrote in and said, "Are you aware of what this gentleman is promoting? Another quack scheme and whatnot?" He has a whole list of titles after his name, and the last possibly being BVD, a wisecrack, underwear. And the article continued for 4 full columns. That's more than 2 full pages. Thoroughly derogatory. Without any investigation, they just assumed, because of the lack of ability to understand, that 5 colored glasses and a bulb could do anything. They lambasted it thoroughly. Upon receipt of this, my father offered to train, to teach, to show a panel of their choice. 7 doctors that they would select should come to his, I think it was a San Francisco or somewhere in California, his next teaching, his next training class. But there was no answer. This was not unusual. Through the years it continued. Not only the AMA, at one point he offered it to the Congress of the U.S., to the President of the U.S., without ever receiving an answer. He once offered to give Milwaukee, Wisconsin free projectors when they were having an epidemic of some sort. Never an answer. Oddly enough, at one time in that same city, Milwaukee, the mayor and police chief were members of his institute. And so his tribulations continued. In the early 1930s, they tried to deport him, that he was not a white man. Since he came from India, he was an Asiatic, they said, and under the then existing regulations for immigration, those were not eligible for citizenship. So after being a citizen for 17 years, they tried to deport him. He was able to prove that his race, the Parsis, were not Asiatic, but they came from ancient Persia and were a white race, just as much as the Europeans and such. That was one of the tribulations. Next, let's see, just before that there was the 1931 case for grand larceny. There was the dog box case in Wilmington, Delaware. Of course, the later two in 1945 and 1947. So he bore this unflinchingly, with thorough conviction of the value of the work. But after that 1924 article by the AMA Journal, the professionals slowly drifted away. He was left with virtually a lay organization, which was satisfactory to him in some respects. People were still using Spectro-Chrome. It worked the way they expected, but it did not spread as fast as it should have. Because if you go to your doctor and say, "Do you know about color therapy?" and he says, "What?" "Well, I mean, you shine these colored lights on your body and it's supposed to do things." The doctor will laugh you out of his office. So it went through the rest of his life till 1966, when my two brothers and I took over his works and efforts. Continued, I should say, because we had worked until the injunction time for the institutes. We were raised in it. So it wasn't much of a transition to continue his work. Though we had married and had families to raise, we continued with the work of Spectro-Chrome. So you read to the end of this chapter, 1985, when this book was written. And now you may mark your VCR number, and we'll get to Chapter 2, Spectro-Chrome Definitions. My father was not satisfied with some of the terminology used by the medical profession, since Spectro-Chrome was virtually a totally separate healing art. He devised his own set of terminology, words and such. As a matter of fact, it got to the point at one part in, let's see, it was one of the magazines, I believe, he described an entire language called Specro. I don't believe enough details exist, though, for me to really give you any help in speaking it. So we'll give you the definitions as we know them. The first, obviously, is tonation, the most important. A tonation means exposing a particular part of the body to the Spectro-Chrome color. At the beginning of this therapy, people would use it at any time, at any time as they saw fit. As I say, there is a certain level of evolution to Spectro-Chrome, but the basics have not changed. We now recommend certain times, which we call the forecast times. At one time it was called the favor scope. We'll go into that, of course, a little further on also. So you expose at a recommended time the particular part of the body where you wish the effect to be generated. That is a tonation. You take one color for 1 hour. The reason for the 1 hour, there is a definite and specific reason, which also we'll get into when we speak of the forecast. Number 2, the colors. Dinshaw colors were made with 5 colored glasses. There was nothing intrinsically magical about them. There was no secret ingredient in them. They were ordinary window glass, as he termed it, but they were matched. That is, each one had to have a certain definite set of colors within it, even though it appeared to be, to the naked eye, basically a certain color. It had other constituents also present, without which you could not achieve 12 colors with 5 glasses. Unfortunately, an error occurred. In the encyclopedia there is a chapter, Father giving great emphasis on the work of Dr. Babbitt, who preceded him. And Spectro-Chrome is much, in large part, based on the work of Dr. Babbitt, but there are considerable differences between the systems. And one of the chapters in the encyclopedia is called Where He Erred. That is, the mistakes that Dr. Babbitt made. Well, none of us is perfect, and it is my sad duty, unfortunately, that I must also say my father erred. He was not privy to the omniscient knowledge, as few of us are, so it is possible to make a mistake. It does not change the benefits or the effects of Spectro-Chrome. It only made a slight change in the way the glass would have to be matched to achieve what he wanted. This I did not learn until after he passed, and my mother taught me the tuning process. The tuning process is ridiculously simple. It consists of taking 5 colored glasses, what you think look like approximately the tints you would need. You match the red and green. You look through both of them at the same time at an incandescent light source, a bulb, and it must look like a decent yellow. Now, this did not always happen. In later years, when glass got very difficult to obtain, it was not ideal. My father and mother did the best they could under the restrictions, the handicaps placed by the government. If we had our druthers, as the saying goes, he could have had glass made to his specifications. Then everyone would look exactly like every other set. They don't. Which is why if you broke one of the glasses in an attuned set, you had to return the entire set to Malaga so the broken glass could be rematched. If you looked at 2 separate projectors, they did not look identical. A turquoise might be a little bluer in one, a little greener in another, but they were still Spectro-Chrome colors. They were acceptable colors. So you looked through the red and green and you saw a yellow, which proved that the red glass passed frequencies, colors, at least as far as the yellow. And likewise in the other direction, that the green filter, green glass, was passing colors towards the red, at least as far as the yellow. You did the same with the green and violet, excepting that instead of making a yellow, the green and violet had to make a sky blue, cerulean blue, a beautiful blue. You have to know, of course, what these colors were expected to look like. So even though the process is simple, if you don't know what the color should look like, you still may not end up with a set of attuned glass. So after you got the red and green, and then the green and violet, then those gave you the basic 3, red, green, violet. Now you looked for a yellow and a blue, which when put together made a decent green, proving that the yellow went as far as the green and the blue went as far as the green. They each went halfway at least towards their neighboring colors. So now when you took a yellow glass, say, and put it with the green glass, the yellow was shaded in one direction, the green is shaded in the other. You get lemon in between the two. Similarly, when you used the red and yellow, you got an orange. and on around the circle, green and blue turquoise and blue and violet indigo. Unfortunately, as I say, it is difficult to find all the shades just as you'd like. So most of the sets that I ever saw, the tune sets, the orange looked virtually identical to red. The reds were just plain too strong. Too much red, not enough to the green. Similarly, indigo looked virtually the same as violet. The violets were too strong. The blue was too weak, whichever way you want to put it. This is not my father's fault. It is just what was available. You can blame the AMA for it. Had they left him alone, had they given a fair trial, a chance for him to teach, better glass would have been available. But he would not give up just because the ideal could not be attained. They work still as he matched them. This error of which I spoke. In the encyclopedia there is the Dinshaw theory of light. It was a theory which in later years he realized, and scientists in general came to agree, was not correct. He said, and there is a diagram which I will show you. This is from his 1933 encyclopedia. It is to be seen on page 80 of the third edition, which we printed just a year or two ago. His idea was that if a yellow filter removed everything but the yellow, the V, which is violet, the I indigo, blue, green then, and orange and red would be left behind or absorbed. So through the filter you only have yellow light coming. Then if you put a green filter, you should not have lemon, since there is only yellow light. The green filter then should leave you nothing. After the disastrous fire in 1945, which destroyed the entire physical plant of the laboratory and resident quarters, Father replaced all his experimental apparatus, demonstration apparatus, and recently I found in the warehouse, where we will go in Malaga later, I found a box which I believe contained material from Polaroid Company. Polaroid, of course, is the corporation founded by Edwin Land, the developer of the instant camera. Now they are, of course, very concerned about colors and things like that, filtration. So in my father's laboratory materials, I recently found a box of filters which, when seen even with a powerful light, this is a violet filter, this is a yellow filter. You put the two together, and as I said, if you cut off all of accepting one frequency, what is left over, if you have another sole color, a monochrome, the second one then will cut off what is left. And indeed, when you look at a light, you see nothing. So that was my father's error. His theory was that light was changed, rotated some way on its axis or whatever when it went through a filter. Therefore, if you had a yellow filter, it rotated it to one position, one rotational fraction perhaps, and then when you put a violet filter to make the purple, it contra-rotated it and made it a certain amount in the other direction. This, obviously, he came to realize in time, just was not so. For the most part, it meant nothing. Nothing had changed. The only color that really was affected, the tuning process still worked. Each color class filter reached up towards its adjacent neighbor. It worked perfectly, excepting for one color, and that is purple. The idea behind purple is that it is the same as magenta, but has more violet in it. It is a sedative magenta, you might say. Magenta is, of course, the median color between red and violet. So when you want purple, you would have to have some way of lessening the amount of red in the magenta and increasing the amount of violet to make it a sedative type of magenta. On the other side, we have scarlet. Magenta is the middle. Scarlet is a redder type of magenta. So to achieve this, since there is no magenta glass, if you had a magenta glass, you would put a violet on top of it. It would make it a more violet magenta, and you would have purple, and same with the scarlet the other way. But to achieve it with just his 5 matched glasses, rather than use the red and violet for magenta to make purple, since you need a lessening of the red and an increase of the violet, you use yellow. Now this may well come as a surprise to graduates who may not have realized that this is a subterfuge, a way around a problem, that we want more violet to make purple. So we need a weaker red, since yellow is only half red, it's half green, in the primary way of thinking of colors. It is a weak red, and it worked that way, but there never was intended any yellow to be in purple. It is supposed to be a weak red. Same way with scarlet, we make that with red and blue, but there never really was any intent to have blue in the scarlet. It is meant to be a weakened violet. But it works that way, the way he designed it. Scarlet is red and blue instead of red and violet. That makes it a weaker magenta. It leans toward the red. The only problem with this is that some glass, a very few, don't pass violet through the yellow filter. Therefore, a few original Dinshaw projectors don't have a purple that is usable. It is more red than scarlet even. It is an absolutely blood red and cannot be used. So if you ever should happen upon one of these some 11,000 Dinshaw projectors that were sold through the years, this would be the only color you would have to check to see whether you could use or not. All the rest, I don't worry about it. They will fall within reasonable bounds. So to check the purple, put the magenta colors in focus, the red and violet. You'll see how it looks. It's a rather deep color, basically red, but it must have the violet tinge, which it will. Then try the scarlet. It will look brighter than the magenta, but it'll have a much more red look to it than the magenta. Now promptly put in focus the yellow and violet, the purple. It must look more violet than the magenta. If it looks redder than the magenta, that purple is not a Spectro-Chrome usable color. You can use all the other 11 colors, but the only recourse with the purple, either use magenta, which in some cases may be satisfactory, or possibly use violet, because purple is 3/4 violet and 1/4 red. Lacking those possibilities, if you didn't want to, the best remedy, of course, is to follow the present plastic, the Roscoeline filter recommendations. Those change from time to time. We'll get into that when we get to the next chapter on color production. Right now we're in definitions, and this has gotten very long, but nonetheless I must tell you, these things happen. We are not saints, angels, or God himself. Errors do creep into man's work, and this was one of them. It's not a fatal flaw. It does not ruin Spectro-Chrome. It only makes a few, just a handful of projectors. I've seen very few, but I know they're out there, so I must in all fairness say Dinshaw erred too. So let's see, where are we here? Alright, section 3 is the area. Many people are not well enough versed in anatomy or physiology to know where each particular organ or gland is in their body. So rather than take the chance that a person would use a color on the wrong area, on the wrong part of the body. My father divided up the body into 22 sections or areas, which is seen on the following page. You don't really have to know what is under each one of those areas, but it is handy. So he and I have listed on the page following the area chart approximately what is under each one of those numbers. In this book, throughout it, we will refer to this area chart rather than by names. Rather than saying take magenta on the heart, we will say take magenta on areas 4 and 5. It is more economical of space, actually, and it is more accurate as far as I'm concerned, because, as I say, not everybody knows where everything is in the body. Number 4 is systemic, front or back. Systemic means to cover all the systems. That is the terminology that we use now. I will show you something at this point that says somewhat otherwise. When Father started in 1920, as I said, he had hundreds and hundreds of practitioners. And for them, since they were well versed in anatomy and whatnot, and diagnosis and naming diseases, he published a small booklet, a pamphlet, called the Spectro-Chrome Compendium. Now this is upwards of 70 years old and it is in crumbling shape, so I will not thumb through that. I will look through this though, a photocopy of it. Now let me get this up close for you. You will note this is his area chart, number B, or letter B, for systemic treatment. Apply the color wave to the entire body, both front and back. I really don't know when that terminology was changed to its present status, wherein when we say systemic it means only front, meaning from the head to the hips, excluding the arms and legs. And back systemic is from area 15 through 19. These are where the vital organs of the body are situated, and I presume my father felt that making a person entirely nude, taking an entire bath of color, was not really necessary. However, you might keep this in mind sometime if you find a case that is refractory and just doesn't seem to want to do what you expect it to. Perhaps this total bath just might do what the present terminology does not indicate. All parts, front and back. But we did realize that there are cases, for instance in high blood pressure, in our today's terminology, that systemic must include from the bottoms of the feet in order to get the results. So it may have been something that Father realized then, that some cases would require this, others, most of them, others would not. So as a matter of convenience, systemic at the moment means only head to hips or head to buttocks. Number 5 is the projector. That is the simplest thing to set aside. Anything will do as a projector as long as it has an ordinary bulb in it. Not a fluorescent, not a neodymium, not a full spectrum so-called. We'll get into that in the next chapter, but all you want is a box with a regular household type bulb in it. Number 6, infragreen, ultragreen. These terms are not used very often, but they are handy to understand. Infragreen means the colors before the green, the ones that have a lower frequency than green. That is red, orange, yellow, and lemon. Green stands in the center of the spectrum, and all the colors beyond that are called ultragreen: turquoise, blue, indigo, and violet. Those are spectral colors, of course. The purple, magenta, and scarlet are colors that complete the circle, go back again from the violet through the purple, magenta, and scarlet back to the red. So you have two spectrums, so to speak, from red to violet and then violet to red. The red to violet colors, I'm not sure, my father could not have been sure how many of these or how much of this effect could have been generated in Babbitt's system because of semantics. Whether he called purple violet or violet purple, there's no way we really can tell. He had so many different dyes and thermolooms and whatnot, but nonetheless, by your following originally the matching of the 5 colors, and of course now we tell you, pardon me, what plastic gels to use to achieve these colors. And you can rest assured they are within reasonable limits. The plastics are not ideal, never have been, never can be. There are methods of doing it with a slideless projector, but that is beyond the scope of this right now. They're beyond our ability to sell them, of course, because of the injunction against such materials. Nonetheless, they will work as we have said. Number 7, opposite colors. For each effect generated by a given color, if you had a circle of colors, right opposite each color would be the opposite effect also. At least basically, there are a few exceptions. But red is the opposite of blue, so blue is opposite of red. Violet is the opposite of yellow, so yellow is the opposite of violet. Green and magenta are not opposites. They are, in effect, the same color. Green is the middle of the visible spectrum, the way nature made it. Magenta, by joining the 2 end colors, red and violet, is the middle color of this artificial spectrum. By averaging the frequencies of red and violet, you come to the same frequency as that of green. So the green is the physical equilibrator, and magenta is the emotional and reproductive equilibrator. This is a device designed by Sir William Crookes called a radiometer. It is a partially evacuated globe. As you can see, there are 4 delicate vanes perched upon a very sharp and well-sharpened pin. When I turn on a light, which I shall now do, the black veins absorb energy, the white ones reflect it, and here you have a transmutation of radiant energy into mechanical energy. These demonstrations are not literally to be taken as anything to do with the aura. I just want to show you that there are many ways that energy is changed from one form to another. The aura that we have in us, through us, around us, upon which we believe spectrochrome works, is obviously much more delicate than any vane could ever be made. Besides working through the aura, of course, there are direct photochemical reactions available, and the medical profession is aware of some of this, or some of these. In 1969, I have a clipping here from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the headline states, "Blood disorder fades in blue light therapy." This is now a widely acknowledged means of controlling blood problems in newborns and RH babies. But herein, apparently the effect is directly through the skin. An infant's skin is so thin that a chemical reaction can be caused to occur, and the excessive levels of bilirubin, which causes the yellow jaundice in these children, can be controlled, and it also prevents thereby brain damage from occurring. Another very well-known at this time therapy is for SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and that has gotten to be a good moneymaker for some. They have huge banks of lights, often fluorescents, and you sit in front of it, and this is said to go through the eyes into the pineal gland, and from there affect the pituitary. At least that's the way some people feel it works. So there is the aura to be considered. There is a direct photochemical reaction through the skin available in some cases, and there is an effect through the eyes available. Next after that, an induction of energy by a huge magnet, MRI, that's magnetic resonance imaging. Your cells absorb or are changed by this magnetic field into which you are placed, or at least part of you, whichever part is under scanning. And then when the magnet is turned off, very delicate instruments pick up the changes in your magnetic field, translate these into an image on a scope, a TV screen, and they can get very accurate, detailed information of what is going on in your body without invading the tissues. This is claimed to be harmless, but I just wonder, any system that adds so much energy to all the cells within, I really wonder how much change may be permanent. It may be a small amount and not readily discernible at a given moment, but is it totally harmless? I really wonder. The manner that many people believe color and vibrational therapies work is by a resonance. If you hold down, say, on a piano, middle C, and then you strike a key 1 octave away, another C, the first note that you've been holding down, you'll be able to hear that. It's not very loud, but it does resonate. One has twice the frequency of the other, or half, depending on which way you're going up or down, striking the keys. But you can achieve a result with resonance. Now, light is not the same frequency as the aura we expect to be working upon on the human body, but it is quite probable that it is a multiple or a division of frequency. In other words, it will resonate with the aura. Whether it is higher or lower is immaterial. The feeling behind this thought is that we are alive. We are not just a mass of chemicals. We are made up of atoms formed into chemicals, molecules, but we are alive. There is a difference between a lump of sugar, a glass of oil. They are carbohydrates or hydrocarbons, but they are not alive. Something is different. Now, in 1939, two very well-respected scientists in Russia, Semyon and Valentina Kirlian, devised a method for viewing some of the energies that emanate from the body. And I can show these, at least in a small fashion. I can show you what some of this looks like. So let me get my Kirlian generator. This I built. It does the same work as a Kirlian generator because a Kirlian generator is not very complicated. On the left you see a Model T Ford spark coil. On the right is a 6-volt battery. That's all that is required for a rudimentary form anyway. It is made out of wood because the voltages are rather high. It has a wood plunger to turn it on. The point of using the ancient Ford spark coil is because it has an interrupter rather than a distributor, and thereby you get a continuous spark. That is the electrical part of it. For the mechanical part, you take a piece of plate glass, coat the back of it with aluminum foil, put a border of electrical tape to keep the voltage on the bottom side and not around the top side. Now you need a darkroom, a photographic darkroom. You take a piece of film and place it on the top of the plate. In this case, I would be placing my hand, for instance, if I were going to photograph my hand, which is quite common. The room has to be completely dark, of course, because this is unexposed photographic film. Then you place your hand and expose it. Now where your hand is giving off energy points, the electricity follows the level of least resistance, and it streams out from your body according to your energy level. Some people believe they can diagnose different disorders by this, by reading how these energies come out from your fingers. I wouldn't doubt it, I just don't happen to be able to do it. This was just made as a demonstration to show you what is available in the world of science. So you take the film and develop it, and then you end up with little lines all around your fingers. This is not readily seen on TV, so I made a copy of it like that. It's enlarged, of course, too. I'm not quite that big. This is overexposed. If you bought a sophisticated unit, you could control the frequency, you could control the voltage, possibly if it were a positive or a negative effect. Since it is an interrupted spark run by a battery, there is a positive and negative. These are details I'm not really all that familiar with, but I know the process can be and has been useful in a diagnostic situation, because one of our members sent me some of these prints before and after a tonation, and the difference is quite striking. That wouldn't be diagnostic, it would be more a proof of the pudding, that an exchange of energy had occurred, that the body has been vitalized or revitalized if you're really in bad shape. If you were to place an inanimate object on this energizing field, you would get streamers from it too, but they would not be changeable. You could not add energy to it by shining a color on it, giving it a medicine, doing any such thing. It is static. It'll give the same image no matter what. Whereas people and other living things, they are dynamic. They change depending on circumstances. If you had a leaf, for instance, and you placed that upon the screen with a film, of course, under it, and energized the box, and took its Kirlian photograph, you will find there will be streamers as expected. Now if you cut the leaf off, take a corner out of it, and take another photo of it, you will then, of course, have a picture with a nip out of it. But not always. There are times when you will take the picture and a really amazing photo results. It is called the phantom leaf effect. It doesn't happen very often. Perhaps 1 in 100 photographs will show it. Why just a few do and most do not, I have not read anywhere. But instead of being missing where you had sliced the leaf, the image is still there, as though it had a spirit or an etheric form, a double. Call it what you will. There is more to life than what can be seen under a microscope. And as long as scientists and doctors persist in seeking life only in DNA or RNA and things that they can see with microscopes, they are doomed to failure. The best modalities like spectrochrome will be overlooked, to your detriment, to their detriment. I cannot think for them. I can only show you why it is worth your while to try spectrochrome, that you are not just chemicals, that you keep on adding other chemicals to make it better and end up with a real potpourri of chemicals which do you more harm than good. Another point with Kirlian photography, somewhat out of the level we're talking now, is with foods. These energies that are coming from foods only persist as long as the food is alive. Canned food, frozen food, anything that has been cooked no longer has the Kirlian energy. So if you must cook food, as virtually everybody does, eat it as soon as possible and don't have leftovers. That too doesn't very well sit with today's society, the way we live, lifestyles. But I can only tell you what is best for you. How well you can follow it, how well indeed I follow it myself. There is always a disparity, let us say. Unfortunate, but a fact of life. Another odd fact of life. If we lose an arm, it doesn't regrow. An octopus, it will regrow. Their lifestyle apparently has something different from what ours is. The Reader's Digest, however, 10 or 15 years ago, related how doctors had noticed, I don't know how come, because the norm of a physician is to apply antibiotics, bandages, and everything else. In this case, if a child up to a teenage level lost a fingertip down to this first joint, call it the last joint if you will, from the bottom up, if there were no medical interference, the entire finger could regrow. Now, with the medical idea that a cell can replicate itself, a bone will make a bone, skin will make skin, fingernail, fingernail, and so on, how can an entire fingertip regrow? The skin might conceivably grow out of what is left at the base where it is amputated. The bone conceivably, of course, since it's after a joint, you'd wonder how more bone cells could form. But how does the cuticle, how does the matrix, how does the fingernail, how do these cells come into being? There is no medical answer. There is a spiritual answer, that there is a matrix within and around you. Whether again you want to call it a spirit, an astral body, whatever. There is a matrix, and the cells up to the point of adolescence are able to change and make new ones. Even though they are not the ones that they originally were, they can duplicate another kind of cell. That this exists, there was a very fascinating book, I thought, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, by Ostrander and Schroeder. It may well be out of print now. This was, again, 1 or 2 decades ago. And one of the experiments they related in that book was taking, I guess it would be fetal tissue, and exchanging where an arm would be for a leg. It wasn't done with a human, but still it was done with some kind of tissue, living creature, and you would expect that you would end up with a monster, an arm growing where the leg belonged, and vice versa. But this is not what happens. These shells around that control the growth of cells, at least at first, insisted that a leg grow where a leg belongs and an arm grows where an arm belongs. Again, there is no medical explanation for this. This was, I guess, a couple decades ago, and there is still no medical explanation because they keep looking through a microscope. The answer is not to be found there. I'll leave you to your own devices what kind of answer you are willing to accept, how in your mind nature's plan works, but it does work in mysterious ways. So we have demonstrated and explained to you various ways that the human aura could be affected. As I said, each cell has a different way of generating its own energies because different cells have different jobs to do. Liver cells have to make bile. It's called the chemical factory of the body. There are hundreds and hundreds of different chemicals that the liver makes. Those cells, because of this activity, generate a certain kind of electricity or frequency or whatever form of energy they do generate. The spleen has other work to do. Your intestines have their own cellular activities to perform. So each part of the body, in doing their functions, generates different, discrete frequencies. Spectrochrome, we believe, does not match these frequencies, but it may resonate with them, it may reinforce them by a coupling effect. These Kirlian energies, whether they are the exact ones that we work upon, I really don't know. The resonance as the piano worked with one key compared to another key. It may be a resonance effect. Whatever way it does, personally, I don't care. I'm a very practical person. Virtually all my working life has been spent in machine shops, welding, things like that. I've been a gray collar worker. I always have dirty hands, greasy hands. This has not been in my best interests, I'm sure. These chemicals have slowly been ingested in my body and they have taken their toll. But at age 65, much thanks to Spectrochrome, I don't have the typical aches and pains, at least so far. It brings to mind a recent quiz show. They ask 100 people, not very scientifically of course, but in this particular case they asked, when do you believe the average person starts to feel old, aches and pains? And the number one answer was age 50. So either I inherited good genes, or I've been very lucky, or just faintly possible Spectrochrome has had something to do with it. Of course, I've been a vegetarian all my life. I'm sure that too has something to do with it. But with all the smoke and chemicals, as a printer, I've had my hands into the most fierce kind of things. You wouldn't believe how many different chemicals a printer uses. And so far, I've managed to stay in good health. So, knock on wood, we'll go to the next step. We've just about covered, see, that's as far as number 8, the aura. We have a few more sections in definitions, which we shall cover. Number 9 is variant breath forecast. As I mentioned before, in the early days people used Spectrochrome anytime, anyway. And many people to this day still use Spectrochrome anytime, anyway. But as the maxim goes, when all else fails, follow the directions. And I believe wholeheartedly that this applies in great force to Spectrochrome. It works well for everybody, everything, but there are times when if you don't follow it, don't blame us. We've warned you, it may not work unless you do follow these. And one of the most often abused is the variant breath forecast. I admit it's somewhat time consuming. With the typical person's busy, hectic schedule, lifestyles, to take an hour out of their time for a tonation at a recommended time is difficult. For a practitioner, it becomes even more so difficult because the forecast times recur approximately every 3 hours. So in an 8-hour day, you would get at most 3 times in. If it happened to come right at the beginning when you opened your office doors as a professional, 1 hour off, then 2 hours and 56 minutes from the beginning of that tonation would be, say, 8 o'clock, then 11 o'clock, and 2 o'clock. That would be about all you could manage to squeeze in. So I understand the constraints, the problems, but nonetheless, it does make a difference in serious cases. The forecast is based on the premise that the human body, just as all of nature, has times, tides, periodicities, cycles, and we use this to our advantage. All people at a given location of the same longitude and latitude should be breathing in the same pattern. That is, one nostril is advancing in pressure while the other nostril is receding in pressure. At the end of this video, I'll give you the information. It is relatively complex when you first start into it, how this is calculated. But when I'm gone, I would like others to be able to continue when they wish to follow all the instructions. Number 10, acute or chronic, referring to the condition that a person may have. One medical doctor I recently read said, as far as he was concerned with arthritis in particular he was talking of, after 6 months, if the condition still persists, that to him was a chronic condition. To us, acute or chronic has no time frame. If you ran a continuing fever for week after week, that to us would still have to be handled as an acute condition, even if it lasted 6 months. I would hate to think of a fever lasting that long, but it could. On the other side of the coin, if you have a condition where the febrile condition has abated, since most conditions do start with a fever, when it has abated, to us, the body has more or less accommodated itself to the circumstance at hand, and that we term as a chronic condition. To us, the difference is an acute condition we use, and there's that term we started with, ultra green colors. Those are the ones past the green, the higher frequencies, the blue, indigo, violet. So if there's a febrile condition, we want to energize that side of the body's defenses. Again, to the other side of the coin, when the body has lost its febrile condition and adjusted to the condition, even though it is not a normal condition, then we want to activate the body. So we use the lemon. Yellow is, as you'll see in the attributes of colors, lemon is the chronic alterative, yellow is the lymphatic stimulant, orange is an even stronger tissue stimulant, and the not often used red is the strongest of all, especially in sensory conditions, the sensory stimulant. So to us, chronic and acute are not used in the medical sense. They're used with spectrochrome definitions and caveats attached. And last, but certainly not least, the ratio. All too often, sadly, I knew a person who almost died, and when I asked them what the ratio was, they could not tell me. And when they did finally get it for me, the answer was obvious, that they needed magenta, and the person pulled through. And I really believe without that information, that patient would have died. He was in such bad shape, circulatory-wise. We'll give you much more details on what to do with the ratio in Chapter 5 under Technique. It is not hard to take, really. All that is to obtain the ratio. It is only the number relating how many times in a minute you breathe compared to how many times in a minute your heart beats. Now, the average doctor, of course, will take your pulse, the heartbeat, and your blood pressure. That's fine as far as it goes, but it does not tell us or tell him how your oxygenation process is going and how the exchange in the lungs of the carbon dioxide is taking place. And we will, as I say, get into that further on in Chapter 5 when we will be talking about the technique. So let's see, this is the end of Chapter 2, Definitions. So I'll give you a break that you may mark the number on at the head of Chapter 3 for your VCR counter. About 14 years ago, a gentleman from Florida stopped by. He had with him a whole collection of plastic filters, gels. And he suspected they weren't ideal, and indeed they were not. And he wondered if I would do him a favor and tell him which ones were usable as spectrochrome colors. And this was fortuitous. It led to a chain of events which has proved very useful to everyone concerned. So I sat down with him and culled through his plastics, and by combining Some were acceptable singly. Some I had to use 2 gels, some 3. I don't remember how far it went, but I did get together a set of gels that made decent colors. Up until that point, with this society, we were really in a bind. We could not sell the projectors without coming under Food and Drug Administration control, and just selling information, the encyclopedia and such, it left people with the information of what to do, but not how to do it. So the Roscoline filters solved that problem. When I first started with the Roscoline filters, it required 13 of them to end up with 12 colors. Some used 1 filter, some used 2, and some used 3. It's the only way I could get the densities, the color match to the glass filters, which we did with rather good results. I mean, as far as the technical aspects were concerned. The practical part of it was, since I couldn't use 5, and I had to use more than 5, it occurred to me it didn't matter how many I used, I would strive for the best colors that I possibly could generate with the Roscoline filters. So we ended up with 13 and got an orange that was better than what we were doing with the red and yellow with the glass. Same with the indigo. It was somewhat better than the violet, although the violet and indigo are tricky colors to match and attune, because virtually all plastics and virtually all glass pass red frequencies. Nonetheless, we have through the years, making changes as required, as noted in the beginning of this book under additions, we are at this moment in the process of changing 1 more. In the additions you will see that not only are the 12 Spectro-Chrome original colors given, there are 6 in-between colors. Now this is not something that I just thought up on the top of my head. Father had devised the idea originally that it would be handy to have in-between colors, and he would have liked to have had 6 in-betweens. So he would have had around the circle of 12 colors, 6 times 12, we would have had 72 colors. I can't do anywhere near that, but I did find filters that would give me, at that time, 6 additional in-betweens. Now Roscoe is dropping the production of 1 filter, I think it's 878, so we'll lose one of those 6. We'll only have 5 additionals. They are not used in this book, but they are there for your benefit should you so decide or opt to try them. As I've mentioned in that additions page, lemon has 1 color in between it and yellow. Lemon has 1 color between it and green. So if yellow seemed too strong in a given case, but you didn't really want just to go to lemon, you could opt for the in-between. Same way with red and orange, same way with orange and yellow, and on as far as I could go. The bottom colors are just plain impossible to make in-betweens at this juncture. I know what they should be. I know how it can be done with a very expensive piece of machinery. I have seen it. A gentleman had one in one of the court cases from the opposition. As I say, I learned a lot in those cases, as much from the opposition as I did from the witnesses who testified for us. But that is neither here nor there at this moment. You have these 11 gels that we have now. A couple were able to be eliminated from the 13, and they do an admirable job. They are not ideal any more than the glass were ideal, but they do the job. They're still within the bounds of Spectro-Chrome colors. As I said, I've seen so many Spectro-Chrome glass sets look different one to the next to the next. There are variations in the manufacturing process by Roscoe Laboratories. We used to have Roscolines, Roscoe Lux, Super Gel. There were a couple made in England, Lee filters, but I just could not keep up with the changes. So we have just settled on the Roscoline, and take my word for it, they are as good, and in some cases, some ways, better than the original glass filters. I'm making every effort to make this video as informational and educational as I possibly can at this point. One really great sorrow I have is that the technology that I'm using, the camcorder and your TV set and the tape in between them that I will send to you, is not ideal. The primary colors, red, green, and violet, cannot be faithfully reproduced by the technology I have. Of course, even if I did have ideal technology, it might get messed up at your end of it if your color balance were not set the same as it should be, as it was here. So I've tried every way I can think of shining Spectro-Chrome colors, projecting them, putting a white sheet behind them, shining them, and the camera just plain fails. Now, the primary colors, even though most people don't realize it, are red, green, and violet. Your eye has 3 sets of cones, 3 sets of nerves for each of those colors, red, green, and blue-violet. The peak receptivity of the far end of the spectrum is towards the blue, but it also does go far into the violet at a lesser level. The camera that I'm looking at this moment runs in the same fashion. It separates the image into red, green, and blue-violet. But again, very weak on the violet. Your color TV, if you take a magnifying glass and get up very close to it, you will note that all the images you see are composed of tiny clusters of red, green, and blue. Tiny dots. By adjusting the voltages, the phosphors are made to glow in different intensities, and that gives you all the shadings of colors. But since the violet end of the camera and the TVs is very weak, I cannot show you what Spectro-Chrome colors really look like. I'm very sorry for this, and it's very disappointing to me. I could have then shown you exactly what the Spectro-Chrome glass looked like if you opted to go that route, but I cannot. However, all is not lost. Some things still show very well. There is a device called the spectroscope. It was invented by Sir Isaac Newton, another one of the names I mentioned early on in this video. He is well known for his work in gravity, the applesauce he made on his head, levity, haha, and such things. He is very well respected as a scientist, but not so much is known about his works with optics. In his day, lenses were very hard to come by in any decent shape. So telescopes and microscopes, things like that, were quite crude. Now, he did a good deal of work in that field, but he would have done more had he had better equipment. This is a glass prism. It's ordinary glass, triangular in shape from one end. The length is immaterial. This device is what Sir Isaac Newton used in his discovery that light is not just what we see, white, or reflected by some objects. It of course shows color. He discovered that light is composed of frequencies, and if you use a prism, a light source with a slit, just a tiny band across the prism, you can break up or refract or diffract, whichever is the correct term. You could break the light into its component frequencies or colors. If you use this just in a raw fashion, you put it on your nose and rotate it, and every object that you look at will have a halo of colors from red to violet. It looks just like a rainbow. A little more sophisticated is the spectroscope. This is nothing more than a prism with lenses. When I look through this spectroscope, I see a complete band of colors. It goes from the red to the violet. There are, of course, frequencies below the red called infrared and frequencies above the violet called ultraviolet. The infrared can burn by impressive energy, heat. The ultraviolet causes burns by expressive energy. They are both workable with spectrochrome. The ultraviolet burns, since it's a loss of energy, you use the red side. The infrared burns like a candle burn, a fire, you use on the remedials on the ultra side, that is blue, indigo, violet. It is that simple to make up your mind, at least in some cases, what to do. This is two samples cut out of the same magazine from different months. This is something of an approximation of what I see through the spectroscope. However, let me see. Yes, it's the correct way around. You'll notice on the upper one, it is dark on that side. And both of them go as far as the green, but not very well all the way through the violet. They should, because that's what I see when I look through a spectroscope. However, this is a printer's rendition, and that obviously leaves something to be desired. Once and for all, I must get it set in your mind. The primary colors are red, green, violet. Where did the red, yellow, blue come from? I can show you quite readily. Among the several hats I have worn in my checkered career also, one of the hats was a printer's hat. It is called process photography and printing. In that, they take a picture, a full color picture, pass it in front of 4 camera filters and make separations, they are called. The filters, each one allows only its own color, in this case yellow, blue, and magenta. The magenta is a misnomer for red. So you take those negatives, the 4 of them, red, so-called red, yellow, and blue, plus black, make a separate printing plate for each one of them, use an appropriate ink with a screen on each one so that it forms them into tiny dots, the same as your TV does. The bigger the dot, the more emphasis that particular color will have. Let me show you a close-up. This is the flap torn off of a box that was printed in process color, that is full color. Notice the initials, Y for yellow, M for magenta, and C for cyan blue. The B, of course, is black. So it is, as I said, a misnomer. It is not red, yellow, and blue. It is the in-betweens of the visual primary colors. The red, green, and violet, the in-betweens are yellow, blue, magenta. What you're doing with those tiny dots, in both cases with the TV, the tiny red, green, and blue, violet, or in this case the yellow, blue, and magenta, you're fooling the eye because you cannot see the individual dots. The eye sees an average of those colors. I really don't have an explanation why the printed ones have to be exactly opposite, the complementary to the red, green, and violet, but it's a fact of life. That's the way it works. In pigments, it is yellow, blue, magenta. In light, visual, therapeutic, it is red, green, and violet. Color production, section B, light sources. This is really a bone of contention with many people, including my father. I must take issue. I don't care what you use as a light source, excepting fluorescence. There are, of course, oddball modern bulbs, the so-called full spectrum, neodymium. Those we have no use for. An ordinary household, the kitchen type of light bulb. That was the first Dinshaw projector. When we go to Malaga, I'll show you one of them. It was a black box, had a 100-watt kitchen bulb in it, and the slides were inserted in the face of it, in the front. They were 4 by 6 inches size. Later years they shrank to 4 by 4, and we cut them down even further in order to economize on the glass down to 2 by 2s and used a much more efficient light source. But we cannot put any stock in this idea that more is better. It just doesn't work that way. If indeed, as we believe, the aura is the receptive factor that carries by resonance or whatever means the energy into the body, that is so ethereal that you don't have to try to sledgehammer with a huge bulb to get the effect. Now let me show you, of course, what we are selling right now, our dollar set of plans. I'll grant you there is very little psychological value to a projector like this. It's a shop lamp, has a clamp on the back, you can put it on a chair, edge of your bureau, whatever. Has a reflector and a 60-watt bulb. As far as I'm concerned, even the darkest colors are very nice and bright as far as being able to see them, where to aim them, and that is all that is necessary. This is the prototype of the plans that I drew. I built this box, and as I built it, I drew the plans. It is considerably the worse for wear. It has been dismantled, packed a couple times, more than a couple times in a suitcase, carried with me to Arizona, down to Texas as a demonstrator, where I gave a couple of seminars. I'll grant you it has little value psychologically. But Spectro-Chrome has worked on animals who are, for the most part, colorblind. It has worked on children who don't know what to expect. It has worked on unconscious people. To my mind, there could be little doubt that it doesn't matter what it looks like, it's what it gives out that counts. The filters, of course, are the Roscolines. They just slide in the front. It gives a very large beam of light. So I have no hesitancy in saying this does exactly the same. All the effects are the same as the most sophisticated looking projectors that my father ever built. Let us return for a moment to the spectroscope, the little device that tells you, shows you exactly what is coming from a light source. If you put a filter in front of it, it would show you what is going through that filter. But in this case, I want to show you the difference between incandescent regular bulbs, the so-called full spectrum color-corrected neodymium bulbs, and between them and the fluorescent tube. Now, I can't very well describe what I'm seeing. I want you to see it. So to this end, I have rigged up another spectroscope. The eye of the camera, that's a fairly good sized lens in there, perhaps 1.5 inches. So I have this cardboard shield. I'm going to place this cradle right in front of the TV. Right in front of the camera, it'll in effect be in front of your TV. The camera will then be looking through the spectroscope. Now this has only a teeny aperture because it is intended and designed to fit your eye, that size. Now the TV camera has a much bigger lens, so you can see much of the spectrum, but I do have to move it somewhat sideways in order for you to see from one end of the band to the other. And at that point, you will see how poor the violet end of the spectrum is represented by this camera and presumably by your TV also. Here we have a regular incandescent bulb. It's about a 15 watt. That's all you need for a spectroscope to see. You have a complete band. You should have a complete band, but the technology does not do an ideal job. There should be red completely blended to yellow, which is not too bad, green, but the blue-violet end just plain disappears. Nonetheless, it is a reasonable representation. An incandescent bulb, the kitchen variety, looks like that. Now we'll turn on the so-called full spectrum neodymium and extinguish the other. And there you see there is no energy in certain parts of the orange and yellow. There is no way that could be called full spectrum. I'll read you their description when I'm finished with this. I'm backing it off to get there, now it's better. No matter where you move it, there is no energy at that frequency. And that cannot be a helpful way to maintain your home's environment. Lastly, we'll turn off the neodymium, turn on a 14 watt fluorescent. And this is where we have to readjust. There's the red side. Those bright bands are known as Fraunhofer lines. They are where an energized state of matter shows exactly what chemicals are being used either in the gas and or the phosphors. Now I have to slide this over. There, past where it's shining any visible, there should be a more blue and violet there, but you do see a bright line that there is still more energy. It is such power that even the weakness of the camera is overcome, and it shows a line of energy. And there's another one towards the right of the screen. No, I cannot quite get them all on the same screen. But the point of this is that fluorescents and these so-called full spectrum bulbs all have either a sin of omission, which is the coated ones, the neodymium. They have no energy in one particular point. And this fluorescent, which has huge amounts of energy at different points. So you see, the human eye is totally unable to tell what it is receiving. It puts all the frequencies together, and if it's somewhere near white light, that's what your brain interprets it as, that you are seeing white light. There's no way you could have foretold that the fluorescent would have so many bands of large energy points, and that the neodymium coated bulb had missing frequencies. Let me read to you from a catalog a member sent me of a particular Chromolux, of a particular neodymium. This one is trademark, called the Chromolux. They are made of special composition hand-blown glass. It doesn't make any difference to me if it's hand-blown or factory-blown. That is not colored or coated, but instead contains neodymium, a rare earth element used in lasers. Of course, lasers, they have nothing to do with spectrochrome. That's an entirely different field. This element is able to absorb yellow and other dulling components of the spectrum. As a result, the light is purified, allowing the values of the violet, blue, green, and red components to be strengthened without producing an unbalance of one color over another. That is Madison Avenue gobbledygook. Dulling colors? There are no dulling colors in the spectrum. We have been eons with a full spectrum from the sun. We live indoors now, out of sunlight, but to say that any frequency, any color is dulling, that is ridiculous. To swallow it is unbelievable, unpardonable. It is unpardonable for them to advertise it in such manner that the unsuspecting may be taken in and buy such trash. It is absolutely valueless to maintain health. I have talked with more than one person, I have written to more than one person about these shortcomings, but I have not seen much of a result from it. Who's going to listen to me, I guess? Anyway, if you believe that every part of God's green earth benefits from sunlight, and we were designed that as I usually go through the litany, red for the liver, green for the pituitary, violet for the spleen, lemon for the digestive system, yellow for the nerves. When you come to yellow, then I have to stop. If there is no yellow in this light, where will the energizer be for your nerves? There won't be. In the long run, some part of the body, whatever is the weakest link, must suffer thereby. And I have no idea what particular problem or disorder or disease may result, but it cannot be beneficial to remove certain frequencies because the manufacturer says they're dulling. The only possible benefit from using such a lamp would be for somebody who has a condition already existing where they need the ultraside to be reinforced. Since you're cutting off one frequency from the infraside, that tilts the balance of colors to the ultraside, the blue, violet, indigo. So if a person needs that side of the spectrum, and they were perhaps using biokinesis or some other method of diagnosing or determining that this was beneficial to them, for a relatively short time, they could use it. It would be like a tonation. It would certainly be a rather widespread, like a shotgun approach to a tonation, but it could be beneficial for a time. But to be recommending this for everybody at all times, it is a total falsehood. As for the fluorescent, since all fluorescents use the same mechanism to generate light, that is a rarefied gas in a tube, it carries the spark more readily because of the gases within it. They get so highly energized that they emit those bright bands, the Fraunhofer bands, Fraunhofer lines. It is impossible, therefore, with that technology, ever, as far as I can tell, to make a lamp, a fluorescent tube, that would not have those lines. Now, the body can resist for a long time these onslaughts of energies. That was an unscheduled stop. The camera ran out of tape. So at the risk of repeating myself, I shall say the body can withstand the onslaught of these unbalanced energies for just so long. Eventually, the piper must be paid. Something breaks down. The neodymium is a sin of omission. The fluorescents are a sin of commission. One has too many. The neodymium has missing. The fluorescent has too many high spots. Tonations are, you might say, a therapeutic, a homeopathic dose, an hour at a time. But to live under one of those bulbs is beyond question. It just must not be in your best interests. So we'll stop momentarily while you can record your VCR counter time or number, and we'll proceed with chapter 4, 5,000 pages.